I've been a plumber for 44 years. Not the kind who works for a company and clocks out at 5. The kind who started with a van, a set of wrenches, and a Yellow Pages listing in 1981 and built something. Harrington Plumbing and Mechanical, Dayton, Ohio. At our peak, we had 11 technicians, a service fleet of 9 vans, and a commercial contracts division that handled 3 hospital systems and a regional school board. I sold it in 2019 for more than I am going to tell you right now because the amount matters later and I want you to hear it at the right moment. My wife Helen died 2 years ago. Colon cancer, 14 months. She was 65, which is not old enough by any measure that matters. On a Tuesday in February, I was sitting in the waiting room of a law office in a building downtown, holding a black pen they had given me at the front desk, about to sign documents my son had told me were a routine estate planning update. The kind of thing responsible families do, he had said, getting our affairs in order, making sure everything was protected. The receptionist leaned across her desk and put her hand on my arm. She said, "Don't sign page 7. I looked at her. She said, "I typed it. I know what it actually does. Let me tell you everything. My son Victor is 42 years old. He is my only child. He has his mother's eyes and my stubbornness and a talent for making people feel that whatever he wants is also what's best for them, which is a useful skill in sales and a dangerous one in a family. He worked in financial advising for 12 years, then started his own wealth management practice in Columbus, which he ran for 6 years before closing it last year for reasons he described to me as a strategic pivot, and which I later understood more clearly. I want to tell you about Helen before I tell you about Victor, because you cannot understand one without the other. Helen Harrington, née Kowalski, grew up in a Polish family in Lorain, Ohio. Her father worked the steel mill for 31 years. Her mother cleaned offices downtown on the overnight shift, so Helen could take piano lessons on Saturday mornings. Helen went to community college on a scholarship she earned, transferred to Ohio State on another one, and graduated with a degree in accounting in 1978. She was the first person in her family to get a 4-year degree. She kept the diploma in a frame in our study and dusted it herself every week. Because, she said once, she didn't trust anyone else to be careful enough with it. We met at a hardware supply trade show in Columbus in 1979. I was 23, 2 years into the business, barely keeping the lights on, wearing the one good shirt I owned. She was working the booth for an accounting software company, which is what she did before she came to work for me, which is what she did before she ran everything behind the scenes of Harrington Plumbing and Mechanical for 38 years, while I crawled through crawl spaces and told myself I was the one building something. I was building something. She was building more of it than I ever fully acknowledged out loud. Helen kept the books, managed the payroll, negotiated the supplier contracts, and reviewed every document we signed. She had a way of reading contracts that was different from the way most people read them. She did not skim for the main idea. She read every clause for what it did not say, the gaps where something uncomfortable could fit later if the relationship went sideways. She found 3 such gaps in our first commercial contract in 1985 that would have cost us $40,000 if a client had chosen to exercise them. The client never knew she had found them. She just quietly rewrote the language and sent it back for signature. When Victor was born, In 1982, she took 6 weeks off and came back, not because she had to, because she wanted to, because she said the business was hers too, and she was not going to watch it from the outside. Victor grew up understanding that his mother was not a supporting player. Helen made sure of that. She included him in dinner conversations about the business from the time he was 12. She explained contracts to him, explained margins, explained what it meant to build something incrementally over years rather than expecting it to arrive. She was teaching him, I understood much later, not just about business but about respect for the thing being built. He learned some of it, not all of it. Victor and I have always been close in the way that fathers and sons are close when one of them is a talker and the other is a listener, and both of them have decided that dynamic works. I am the listener. I listened to Victor for 42 years. I listened to him tell me about his business and his clients and his apartment and his plans and the things he was working on and the things he needed. He is good at talking. He was the best debater at his high school. He can take any side of any argument and make it sound like the only reasonable position. Helen balanced him. That is the right word. She loved him completely and saw him clearly at the same time, which is a combination that requires a kind of attention most people cannot sustain. When Victor pushed, Helen pushed back gently with the precision of a woman who knew exactly where the line was and would not allow it to be moved. When he called with the big ideas and the strategic pivots and the things he needed, she was warm and supportive in a way that somehow also communicated that she had a complete picture of what was happening and was not going to pretend otherwise. After she died, there was no longer anyone in the room who could do that. I did not understand this immediately. Grief does something to your perception. Not dramatically, not in the ways people talk about. The fog and the inability to function, it is subtler than that. It is more like a recalibration you don't know is happening, a slow movement of your center of gravity that you only notice when something tries to knock you off balance. The calls from Victor increased after Helen died, not slightly, significantly. Where before I'd hear from him 2 or 3 times a week, it became daily, sometimes twice a day. Always warm, always full of concern, always asking how I was eating and whether I was sleeping and whether the furnace was keeping up in the cold. He drove from Columbus to Dayton 3 weekends in a row in November. He brought groceries I didn't ask for and rearranged things in my kitchen that didn't need rearranging. He suggested I think about simplifying. The house was a lot for one person. The property taxes were going up. Had I thought about a condo, something manageable, maintenance-free? I told him I was fine. He said he knew I was fine. He just wanted to make sure I stayed fine. That was the phrase he used, that he wanted to make sure I stayed fine. The way you say it about a person when you're not entirely sure they have the capacity to ensure it themselves. I noticed this. I am a plumber. I am not a sophisticated man in the ways that Victor would describe as sophisticated. I did not go to college. I have read a lot of books, but not the ones that get you into certain rooms. I have spent my professional life crawling through basements and cutting through walls and diagnosing problems that other people could not see because they did not know what to look for. What I know is systems, how things connect. What the pressure reading in one pipe tells you about the condition of a pipe 3 floors away. What a sound in a wall means before the wall starts showing you a stain. I know when something is running wrong before it announces itself. By December, something was running wrong. It was in the small things. The way Victor had started including himself in sentences about my financial life without having been invited in. The way he referred to decisions about my accounts as things we needed to think about together. The way he had, without my asking, started forwarding me articles about estate planning and probate and the complexity of managing assets alone in your late 60s. The way he had stopped calling them my accounts and started calling them the assets, which is a word that removes a person from the thing and makes it sound like a problem to be managed rather than a life to be lived. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table and I thought about the cell. I knew the cell. I spent 44 years building a plumbing business, and every plumber who goes into business for himself either learns to recognize the cell or loses his shirt to a supplier or a contractor who is better at it than he is. The cell is when someone has a conclusion they want you to arrive at, and they build you a path to it that looks like your own reasoning. Victor was building me a path. In January, he called and said he had been talking to his estate attorney, a man named Gerald Whitmore, whose firm was in downtown Dayton, and that he had asked Whitmore to review my existing documents, the will Helen and I had done in 2015, and make some recommendations. He said he had taken the liberty of having Whitmore's office pull the records. He said Whitmore had some thoughts, and would I be willing to come in for a conversation? I said I would think about it. He called again 3 days later. He said Whitmore had flagged something in the existing will structure that could cost me significantly in probate, and that the sooner we addressed it, the better. He used we again. He said he just wanted to protect my interests. He said he knew I didn't love dealing with paperwork, that it had always been Helen's department, and that was exactly why he wanted to handle this for me, so I didn't have to worry about it. That sentence. That was exactly why he wanted to handle this for me. Helen managed our finances. That is true, not because I couldn't, but because she was better at it, and we divided responsibilities in the way that marriages divide responsibilities when they function well. I filed taxes. I managed the accounts payable for the business. I read every contract before I signed it for 44 years, which is what you do when you have learned from experience that the sentence that cost you everything is always on the page nobody told you to look at. Victor knew his mother managed our finances. He had been watching this for 40 years. What he may have miscalculated was the difference between Helen managing our finances and me not understanding them. I said I would come in. I did not tell Victor that the week before the appointment I called my own attorney. His name is Frank Byers. He's 70 years old, semi-retired, has been my attorney since 1989. I called him on a Wednesday morning and I told him what was happening. Frank is not a dramatic man. He asked 3 questions. He asked what Victor had told me about the documents. He asked who Gerald Whitmore represented in this arrangement, me or Victor. He asked whether Victor had been given any access to my financial accounts. The first answer was estate planning update. The second answer, I did not know. The third answer was no, not formally, though I had mentioned some figures to him in conversation that I was now wishing I had kept to myself. Frank said, Bob, don't sign anything at that meeting without reading every page. And bring a pen that you can walk out with. Don't use theirs. I said, Frank, I'm a plumber. I've been reading contracts since before that boy was born. He said, I know. I just want to hear myself say it. I said, "What do you think is happening?" He said, "I think your son loves you, and I think he's also in some kind of financial difficulty that he hasn't told you about, and I think those two things have become very difficult for him to separate." He paused. He said, "Bob, do you know what happened to his practice in Columbus?" I said. "Strategic pivot." He said, "I've heard it called that." He told me what he had found, not through any improper channel. Public records, FINRA records, a newspaper item from a Columbus business journal. Victor's wealth management practice had been under a regulatory review for 14 months before it closed. 2 former clients had filed complaints alleging misallocation of funds. Nothing criminal had been charged. The review was ongoing. The practice closure had been described publicly as voluntary. I sat with that for a moment. I am not going to tell you I was not hurt. I was. Not by the information specifically, by the 14 months during which Victor had been calling me twice a day and bringing groceries and talking about protecting my assets and simplifying my life, during which time he had apparently been dealing with this and had not said a single word about it to me. That is the hurt, not the trouble itself. That he had been in trouble and had decided that what to do about it was to come to me with a problem he had reframed as a solution. I drove to the appointment on a Tuesday. I wore my good coat, the one Helen bought me in 2018 for our 40th anniversary dinner. I arrived 7 minutes early, which is how I arrive at everything, because I spent 44 years in a trade where if you are late to a job, you have already started the relationship wrong. Victor was already in the waiting room, in a gray suit, looking good in the specific way that people look good when they have put effort into looking unworried. He stood up when I came in. He hugged me. He smelled like expensive aftershave, and he had gotten a haircut recently, and his shoes were new. I noticed these things the way I notice everything, quietly, without remarking on them, because some information is more useful when the person giving it doesn't know you have received it. The waiting room was small and modern. 2 leather chairs, a low table with a fanned spread of business magazines, a small reception desk behind a glass partition. The woman at the desk looked up when we came in. She was young, late 20s, dark hair pulled back, a composed professional expression that was doing some work over something underneath it. She asked us to sign in. She gave Victor a form. She gave me a pen. Her hand was very still when she gave me the pen. Not naturally still, deliberately still. The stillness of a person who is managing their own reaction to something. I signed in. Victor went to look at his phone. The woman at the desk leaned forward slightly, just slightly, and said, "Mr. Harrington," quietly. I looked at her. She said, "I need to tell you something before you go in." I looked at Victor. He was looking at his phone. I stepped closer to the desk. She said, "Don't sign page 7. I said nothing. She said, "I typed these documents. I know what page 7 actually does. It is not what Mr. Whitmore will tell you it does." I looked at her for a moment. She was scared. Not of me. She was scared in the way people are scared when they have decided to do something that could cost them significantly and they have committed to it anyway. I said quietly, "Tell me." She said, "The document Mr. Whitmore has prepared is described to you as an estate planning update. Most of it is standard. Pages 1 through 6 are what they say they are, a revised will structure, some trust provisions, nothing unusual. Page 7 is a separate instrument embedded in the document. It is a durable power of attorney that activates immediately, not at incapacity, immediately upon your signature, designating your son as your sole financial decision maker with authority over all accounts, real property, and investment assets. There is no sunset clause. There is no co-trustee. There is a provision on page 7, paragraph 4, that explicitly waives your right to revoke without your designee's written consent. She stopped. She said, "Once you sign that page, you cannot undo it without Victor's permission." Those are the words, his permission. I said, "And the rest of the document," she said, "is designed so that you will have read pages 1 through 6, found them reasonable, and carried that reasonableness into page 7 without reading it as carefully. The pagination breaks at the end of page 6, in the middle of a paragraph. It is designed to read as continuous." I said, "Who drafted this?" She said, "Mr. Whitmore drafted it. At Mr. Victor Harrington's instruction, I typed it 4 days ago. I have been deciding since then what to do about it." I looked at her for a long time. I said, "What is your name?" She said, "Amanda." I said, "Amanda, why are you telling me this?" She said, "Because I have a grandfather." She stopped. She said, "I typed what I was asked to type, and then I read what I had typed, and I am not able to sit at this desk and watch you walk in there and sign it." She said, "I know what this might cost me. I filed my resignation this morning. I've already accepted another position. But I wanted to tell you before the other job gave me a reason to feel safe about saying something." Victor looked up from his phone. He said, "Dad, they're ready for us." I looked at Amanda. I said very quietly, "Thank you." She nodded once. Her hands were steady on the desk. I walked into the conference room. Gerald Whitmore was at the head of the table, 60-something, gray suit. The smooth, professional manner of a man who has spent a career making complicated things sound simple, and simple things sound complicated, depending on what the situation required. He stood when I came in, shook my hand, told me it was good to meet me, said Victor had told him a great deal about me, said the documents were all in order and this would not take long. I sat down. Victor sat to my left. He was relaxed. He had the ease of a man who has done the preparation and is now watching the outcome arrive on schedule. Whitmore walked me through the document, pages 1 through 6. He was thorough, professional, highlighted the relevant sections, explained what each provision did. He used the word protection frequently. He used the word simplification. He talked about the complexity of managing an estate of this size, and here he glanced at Victor without proper structures in place. He talked about the peace of mind that came from having a trusted family member authorized to act quickly if circumstances required it. He arrived at page 7. He said, "This final section is a durable power of attorney, a very standard instrument. It names Victor as your authorized agent for financial matters in the event that you are unable to manage them yourself." I said, "In what circumstances does it activate?" He said, "In the event of incapacity, as determined by a physician." I said, "Is that what it says on page 7? He looked at me. A very brief recalibration, too fast for most people to catch. I caught it because I have been watching people recalibrate for 44 years, because that is what happens when you are about to give someone a bid they did not expect and you watch their face for the tell. He said, "The language is standard." I said, "May I read it?" He said, "Of course." I turned to page 7. I read it. I read paragraph 1, which described the scope of the power. I read paragraph 2, which listed the asset categories covered. I read paragraph 3, which used the phrase immediately upon execution, not upon incapacitation. And I read paragraph 4, which stated that revocation required written consent of the designated agent. I put the document down. I said, Gerald, paragraph 3 says immediately upon execution. It does not say upon incapacity. A silence. Victor said, Dad, that's just standard drafting language. It doesn't mean. I said, Victor, I said it the way I have said his name twice in his life when I needed him to stop talking. He stopped. I said, Gerald, what does immediately upon execution mean in this document? Whitmore said, the activation language is. I said, it means this takes effect the moment I sign it. He said the practical effect is contingent on. I said the legal effect. I am asking about the legal effect. He looked at his document. I said paragraph 4. Revocation requires written consent of the designated agent. Who is the designated agent? Victor said, Dad, you're reading it out of context. I said, Victor, I have been reading contracts since 1981. I am reading this in exactly the right context. I closed the document. I said, Gerald, I am not going to sign this today. I want you to know that I have an attorney named Frank Byers who will be receiving a copy of this document by end of business today, and who will be in contact with your office. I am going to stand up now, and I am going to drive home, and I am going to make a cup of coffee. I stood up. Victor stood up. He said, Dad, please. His voice had changed. The ease was gone. Something younger had come into it. He said, I am trying to protect you. That is all I have ever been trying to do. I looked at my son. I looked at him for a long moment. At 42 years old, in a gray suit, with new shoes and his mother's eyes and all that talent for making people feel that what he wanted was also what was best for them. I looked at the specific quality of his face in that moment, which was not the face of a villain. I want to be honest about that. It was not that face. It was the face of a man who had gotten into serious trouble and had looked at his aging father and made a calculation that was wrong, not only morally, wrong in the way that a bad pipe diagnosis is wrong, based on incomplete information and a conclusion decided before the work was done. I said, Victor, I know about the practice in Columbus. His face. I said, I know about the regulatory review. I know about the client complaints. I know that your practice didn't close because of a strategic pivot. I know that you have been dealing with something serious for over a year and that you came to me not to help me, but because you were scared and you needed something, and you have spent your entire life knowing how to talk your way into the things you need, and this time you were doing it to me. He said nothing. I said, you are my son. You are the only child I have, and your mother loved you more than anything in her life except possibly me. And some mornings I am not sure about the ranking. I am not going to turn my back on you. But I am also not signing that document, and I am not going to pretend this did not happen. I picked up my coat. I said, I think you should drive home to Columbus tonight. I think you should call your own attorney and sort out what needs to be sorted out. And I think when you have done that and have a clear picture of where things actually stand, you should call me, not to ask for anything, just to talk. I will answer. I walked out of the conference room. Amanda was at the front desk. She looked up when I came through the door. I stopped. I said, Are you going to be all right? She said, Yes. I have a start date at the new firm on the 1st of next month. I said, What kind of law? She said, Estate litigation, which I understand better now than I did a week ago. I said, Amanda, I want you to know something. She waited. I said, I sold my plumbing business in 2019 for $4.5 million. I have a pension, a paid-off house, and investment accounts that Helen and I spent 30 years building. I am not a wealthy man in the way that certain rooms define wealthy. But I am a man who has enough, and I have always been careful with what I had. And what I have is mine until I decide it belongs to someone else. Nobody was going to take it from me with a document on page 7. She said, I know. I could tell. I said, I am going to send a letter to the Ohio State Bar about what happened in that conference room today. Not to destroy anyone, because what was being done in there is done to other people who may not read page 7. She said, I filed a report with the bar this morning before you arrived. I looked at her. She said, I typed the document. I have the original instructions in my email. I made copies before I resigned. I said, you did all of that this morning. She said, I have a grandfather. I shook her hand. I said, Amanda, I want you to know something else. She waited. I said, I have been in this business for 44 years. I have been in rooms with people who were trying to get something from me since I was 23 years old and 2 years into a company I was not sure would survive the first winter. I can usually tell. I could tell in that waiting room from the way you handed me the pen. The way your hand was too still. She said, I didn't think I was that obvious. I said, most people would not have noticed. I am a plumber. I notice pressure differentials. She looked at me for a moment like she was deciding whether to say something. She said, can I tell you why I actually did it? I said, you told me. Your grandfather. She said, that's true. But there's more. She paused. She said, I have been at this firm for 11 months. In 11 months, I have typed 7 documents. 3 of them were what they said they were. The other 4 had things in them that I noticed and said nothing about. Things that were not necessarily illegal, but that I did not believe the person signing them fully understood. I said nothing about those 4 because I told myself it was not my place. Because I told myself I was just the person who typed them. Because I told myself that the attorney had reviewed them and signed off, and it was not my job to second-guess the attorney. She stopped. She said, I have been thinking about those 4 documents for weeks. I don't know who signed them. I don't know what happened to those people. But I have been thinking about them, and when I typed this one and read what page 7 actually did, I decided I was done telling myself it was not my place. I looked at her. I said, 4 documents. She said, yes. I said, you should include that in your bar report. She said, I did. This morning. I shook her hand. I drove home. I made coffee, and I sat at the kitchen table, the one Helen and I bought the year we moved into this house in 1988, a solid oak table that has seen 35 Thanksgiving dinners and 3 generations of homework and more Sunday mornings than I can count. I thought about Helen. I thought about what she would have said about all of it. She would have said 2 things. She would have said, Bob, your son is in trouble and he needs help. Not a pass, but help, and those are different things, and you know the difference. And she would have said, that young woman at the front desk. That young woman at the front desk. Frank Byers called at 4 in the afternoon. I had sent him the document 2 hours earlier. He read it, and he said, Bob, quietly. Just my name, the way you say a name when the words that come after it need a moment to arrange themselves. I said, I know. He said, This would have given Victor complete and irrevocable control of your accounts and real property from the moment you signed it. I said, I know. He said, you'd have had no legal recourse without his written agreement to undo it. I said, I know. He said, how did you know not to sign? I told him about Amanda. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, she still works there? I said, she resigned this morning. She filed a bar report before I arrived. Frank said, I want her name. I said, why? He said, because I have been practicing law for 40 years and I want to send her a letter. I gave him her name. Here is what happened after. Victor called me on Thursday. He did not ask for anything. He said, Dad, I want to explain. I said, I'm listening. He talked for a long time. He was honest in a way he had not been honest with me in over a year, about the practice, about the complaints, about the debt he had accumulated, about the fear that had been driving the calls and the groceries and the estate planning conversation. He said he had told himself he was protecting me. He said he had told himself that the power of attorney was just a precaution, that he would never have used it in any way I wouldn't have wanted. He stopped. Then he said, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I know what I would have done. That sentence, that was the sentence that was worth more than the apology, more than the explanation, more than anything. That was my son telling me the truth when the truth did not flatter him, which is the hardest kind of telling and the only kind that means anything. I said, Victor, I am going to help you, not with money, not yet, because I do not yet know enough about your situation to know what help means. But I am going to sit with you and your attorney and Frank Byers, and we are going to look at the whole picture and figure out what you actually need and what the real options are. And we are going to do it honestly, with everything on the table, which is the only way I have ever done anything. He said, Dad, I don't deserve that. I said, Victor, you are my son. Deserving is not the whole calculation. He said, I'm sorry. I said, I know. Call me Sunday. He called on Sunday. We talked for an hour and a half. He is working with his attorney on a settlement with the former clients. It is not criminal. It is going to be expensive, and he is going to get through it. I am not paying for it. He did not ask me to. Frank sent a letter to the Ohio State Bar regarding Gerald Whitmore. An investigation has been opened. I understand these things take time. Before I tell you how the rest of it settled, I want to tell you about a letter. Helen sent me a letter once. Not a card. A letter, 3 pages, handwritten on the good stationery she kept in her desk drawer, the cream-colored kind, with her initials embossed at the top that she used for things that mattered. She wrote it in the spring of 2022, 8 months before she died, when she was still well enough to write clearly and had decided that certain things needed to be said in writing rather than trusted to memory or to me summarizing them imperfectly later. She gave it to Frank to hold. He gave it to me at the kitchen table 2 weeks after the funeral, set it down without a word, and left me to open it in my own time. I have read it many times. I will not quote it all because some of it is between Helen and me. But one paragraph I will share because it is directly relevant to everything I have told you tonight. She wrote, Bob, I know you. You are the most patient man I have ever met in any room. But there is one situation where your patience becomes a problem, and that situation is Victor. When he is in trouble, you wait too long. You wait because you love him and because you're afraid of what you might see if you look too directly. I am asking you, in whatever comes after I'm gone, to look directly. You will know when you need to, and you will know what to do. You have always known. You just needed permission. So here it is, in writing, from me. You have permission to see clearly, and you have permission to act on what you see. She knew. She was already gone, and she knew a version of this was coming. Not the document specifically, not page 7, not Amanda, but the shape of it. The shape of a man who loves his son and whose son was going to test that love in a specific way and who would need someone to tell him he had permission to see clearly. She gave me that permission in a letter on cream stationery. I keep it in the top drawer of the study desk, unlocked. Some things you do not need to secure against the world. You just need to know where they are. Frank also sent a letter to Amanda Chin at her new firm. I do not know exactly what it said. I know it was 3 paragraphs and that he copied me on it. It ended with the line, "In my 40 years of practice, I have met very few people willing to do what you did in that waiting room at the cost you risked for a stranger. The legal community is better for having you in it." She'd sent me a note. 2 sentences. It said, "Thank you for the letter. I hope things are better with your son." I wrote back and said they were. I am 68 years old. I have 1 child, and he is not perfect, and I am not perfect, and we are working at it the way families work at things when the damage is real but not permanent, slowly, one Sunday call at a time. The house is not for sale. The accounts are in my name. The will is the one Helen and I had written in 2015, which Frank has reviewed and which does not need updating and which will distribute everything exactly as Helen and I intended when the time comes. I drove past Whitmore and Associates last week on my way to the hardware store. A different name on the door. I did not slow down. Helen had a thing she used to say. She said it about the business, about the clients, about the contractors, about Victor, about all of it. She said, "Bob, the most dangerous person in any room is the one who's decided they already know the shape of you." She was right about most things. She was always right about that one. I am not a complicated man. I am a plumber who built something and protected it and made one very significant mistake, which was spending 14 months not noticing what my son was building in the rooms next door. I will not make that mistake again. But I did not sign page 7. And a young woman at a front desk who had nothing to gain and a new job to protect looked at a stranger walking toward a conference room and said the true thing because she had a grandfather and because she typed what she had been asked to type, and she read what she had typed, and she decided that sitting still was not an option. Sometimes one sentence is the whole thing. Don't sign page 7. 4 words. Everything I have is still mine. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves and read every page before you pick up the pen. Every single one.